Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Emergency Podcast with me, Ian Bailey.
And me, Nigel Goodwin.
Now, there might be some lag issues on this one, and we're going to have to see how we get. But we're going to try. On this show, we are trying to fix British politics. I think we described it as one crisis at a time, but I think, to be fair, the crisis seems to be never ending at the moment on a number of fronts. But we had tried to distill it down into jobs, services, and community as buckets. And on this one, we wanted to kind of have a bit of a skim on services and try and understand what's broken and therefore what ideas are there to fix it.
Yeah. Yeah, and a skim is interesting, Ian, because I'm not entirely sure how you skim services, because just a cursory glance at services is the services in this country tell you that everything is broken, literally everything. You could dig into any one of them, whether it's railways, NHS, water, energy supply, education, everything and no, it doesn't just feel, it genuinely is
Well,
broke.
some of the statistics as well almost sort of neatly illustrate the problem. So, as an example, as I understand it, statistically speaking, the reading comprehension level of pupils in it's always English schools because when the government quotes statistics, it's only ever quoting statistics in England now because of devolution. But it's at the highest in the Western world, as has been described. We've got these amazing results coming out of schools. Fine. But if things are so great, why do we have a real shortage of teachers and teaching assistants, and B, the staff that we have are so unhappy and tired and fed up that they're leaving in increasingly large numbers. So we can't have, on one hand, things are great, but then in practice, things aren't. And go and ask the parents of kids who are going into these schools and are getting amazing literacy results and ask them, how is the mood? What's the school like? And they'll all have the same problems and list the same issues.
Yeah, I mean, and you can go further, can't you, in terms of saying, well, politicians love to pick the statistics that work for them. We talked on the last one about about unemployment figures are always the figure that's used, even though unemployment figures really do only scratch the surface of the problem. Here, again, literacy rate. Look, literacy is a fundamental um, core skill, and that being high is a good thing. But to go back to what you were talking about the other day when we talked about a skills crisis, true education is about how well we are arming our kids for the world of work in the future. And right now our school system is very much based on on a very old model right now. But I mean, look, whether you look at per pupil funding, which is down over the last 10 to 15 years, whether you look at the teacher shortages, or whether you go to universities and start to look at the problem there. I mean, look at universities, right? It's like
That's a
every
massive
single
issue.
university is in near financial ruin, except for probably Oxford and Cambridge. That's about it.
And
That's a
ruin
major
is
problem.
the word. I
Yeah.
mean, some of them are literally on the verge of bankruptcy.
Yeah, and look, that's one part. That's why services are. It's a big conversation. I think we'll probably end up talking about this over multiple
We
episodes.
will.
But you've just mentioned education. My pet peeve these days is always about water. I think yours is about energy. Whether it's Thames Water being in the news a lot, but it's not just Thames Water, is it? It is water in general. We have put ourselves in a position as a nation where a basic fundamental human need and right is now controlled by foreign investors, banks, and people who fundamentally don't really care if the water is clean or safe. They just care about making a profit. And if I look at something like Thames Water, the number, well, or water in general in the UK, the number of spills, the amount of sewage spills in this country, 464,000 spills in 2023. That is up from 250,000 only 5 or 6 years ago, right? It is, and again, look, any spill is
It's
bad,
getting worse.
but if you compare it, sorry,
It's getting worse. The spills are getting worse, much worse. You can't, I think a
Mm.
lot of it people kind of hadn't really noticed before. Now you can't help but notice just how the more rain that falls, the less water there actually is to come out of your tap, as one example. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And look, and to go back to the lag point, I actually think this is a good example of how we can, it's like the how things are broken in this country. When your internet starts having problems, because actually broadband coverage in this country is lagging behind the rest of Europe. It's like it doesn't matter which service you pick, Britain is behind. It is behind on everything. There is not a single one that we could list where we are leading the world right now.
But this is the point. And I think this is why a lot of people are quite agitated because they're paying record levels of taxes. The Tories put taxes up to the record levels in peacetime. But despite that, the outputs that people are getting for their taxes are getting worse. So we've talked about health, education. Well, we haven't really talked about health, but we certainly talked about education. We talked about water. We talked about broadband. What is the money being spent on? And I think people are just really now starting to ask this question, well, where has my money gone? And we didn't really touch on health, but let me describe it to you like this. I was going to say the NHS, but remember that there are four NHSs. So the NHS, when people talk about it, is always the NHS in England, but it's a bonfire, right? It's a raging bonfire where the more money you tip in at the top, the more money is burned and the more ash gets dropped onto the service at the bottom to clog it up so that it isn't delivering. You can't keep adding more money because the more money that they spend, and every year you get politicians of either party saying, we're spending more than ever on the NHS. Great. But how come outcomes at the bottom are getting worse? How come the service delivery is poorer? Why are there less beds in the hospital? Why can't I see a GP? Why? The money is being burnt by the structure. And this is the point with a lot of this, where it's not that we're not spending enough money, it's that we're spending it in the wrong way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think because you've just touched on a whole host of pieces of the NHS there. I think what you've also touched on is the problem that politicians and even the media have when they talk. The NHS is problematic to talk about anyway, and I think that is something that always frustrates me. Okay, criticism of the NHS does not mean criticizing the people who work there. The people who work
Absolutely
there
not.
do incredible work, and if anything, the criticism of the NHS is because we want it to be better, both for the
Yeah.
people who work there and the people who have to use it, which is everyone, literally everyone in the country. But a good example there, you'd mentioned kind of GPs, you mentioned hospitals, you mentioned all the kind of different care aspects of the NHS. A lot of the problems are exacerbated by each of those problems internally. It's all interlinked. Because again, GP is a perfect example. It's at the very front. I need a GP appointment for something. I'm not feeling well. I can't get a GP appointment. I can't get hold of my GP. I'm on a waiting list, whatever. It's just not happening. I start to feel more ill. So I think, oh, I'll go down to the walk-in centre. The walk-in centre is absolutely rammed. I can't get to see anyone at the walk-in centre, which is for different types of cases. So what do? I go to A&E, which is not where I should be going. And then, of course, because the people in A&E have to see me, they have to treat me because it's A&E. I am taking those people away from true accident and emergency. The entire system gets broken by just one person doing that because, of course, it's not one person, it's millions of people
And it's
doing
also
it.
the highest possible way to actually fund your treatment. The most
Yeah,
expensive
most
possible
expensive.
cost is you going to A&E. But as you say, people end up doing so because there are no alternatives. So you've got a system where because of budgetary constraints, there aren't enough GP appointments and there aren't enough walk-in centres, or you get the absurdity where people have to ring at 8:30 in the morning for even a chance of being able to get an appointment for a doctor, and you ring at 8:31 and it's constantly engaged, and by 8:40, sorry, everything's gone for the day. It's an absurd system, right? Trying to throttle demand, but you can't take away the need. If you're ill and you think I'm really ill, you're going to go and do something about it.
Exactly, and the risk that it puts, we can talk about the nation's health, but just on an individual level, the risk that puts on people, because again, not everyone's going to be pushy. Some people will say, you know what, oh, I'll be all right, I'll just wait. But you never know. This is the reason we have these services in place for early diagnosis, because early diagnosis for the more critical things is critical, right? And Britain is lagging behind, I mean, it has been for a while, lagging behind Europe on things like cancer survival rates, cancer detection rates. These are, it's a scary time. But when I think about the NHS, when I think about politicians and how politicians talk about it, they flirt around the edges. They kind of say, well, this bit's a bit broken and we need to work on it and we need to invest more money. They never are willing to say the thing they truly need to say, which is hard to say, but you just have to come out and say it. It's the acceptance of the problem, which is today in 2025, NHS is not fit for purpose. It is not fit to do the job it was designed to do. Not because the people aren't working hard, not because the people don't want to do it, and not because we need to move to a private system, but because the NHS was designed in 1945 and it may have had a few reforms over the years, but it is not fit for the 21st century. It needs to be completely, to use your favourite blank sheet of paper concept, if you were designing the NHS again today, you would design it differently.
Absolutely, and we keep going. There's been a lot of restructures and changes and whatever, and you have a change of government and a change of perspective, and then they go and spend a whole load of money in several years on changing the internal structures, and some of them have put more internal market stuff in, and some of them take them away again. But in essence, all you're really doing is substituting one insanely complex and costly structure for another. That's all that's happening. And you end up where, when you ask how exactly is it that we're putting more money in to the system, but we're getting so little out at the bottom, it's because it's being burnt by the administration. The structure is so absurdly complex with all of these contracts going here and there. That is where the money has gone. And if you were going to, again, as you say, my blank sheets of paper, you would not design this if you were starting from scratch. So why on earth are we putting up with it?
Because it's politically convenient to do so. I think it's political short-termism. And again, and this is not a criticism of Keir Starmer, it's not a criticism of any politician. All politicians are like this. They are driven by the desire to be re-elected. And so they're driven by the kind of 3 year to 5 year plan. That's what they're looking at. It's like, if I can just, I mean, and this is why I do get annoyed with Keir Starmer, because he even talked about this when he was in opposition, sticking plaster politics, but the very thing that he and everyone in government is doing, whether it's Labour or Tories or whoever, is exactly that. They're looking at it and they're saying, this is a bit of a problem, but then they're taking each piece and saying, okay, we need to fix GPs. Okay, so what do we do about GPs? We need to increase the number of appointments, so they come up with an idea about that, but that
Target.
doesn't fix. Yeah, targets. It becomes about targets, which is not the way to fix something. You can give someone a target, but ultimately, if the if the tools you have at your disposal are not there for you, you're not going to meet your targets. It's as simple
Especially
as
when
that.
you end up with 47 targets. Rather than having a generic make people healthier, serve your community. Oh, well, I've got this target and this target and this. You mentioned political short-termism. Let me just touch on something that's greatly entertained me over the last few days. So, look, the Conservative Party, thrown out of office just over a year ago by a population who were largely sick to the back teeth of them. And they are going out there this week and they're complaining about all of the things that they say Labour are doing, such as having high taxes, such as not having good public services, such as having high numbers of people coming across in boats, such as. And these are posts both put up by the party and by their shadow ministers and Kemi Badenoch and so on. And on practically every single response, on every single post, this is all on X. But people are saying, well, hang on a second, you did that, right? This was the mess you left, or you had 14 years and did nothing. So you talk about political short-termism. We see this, and look, Labour are just as bad when they go into opposition as well. It's almost like this tabula rasa thing, wipe the slate clean. We did no. All of the problems now, they must be somebody else's fault. And this is why nothing ever changes, because as you said, we're on this endless cycle of I've got to get re-elected in 4 years, and I've got to at least tick enough boxes to make people think, yeah, all right then. And it's just not good enough anymore.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I do have some sympathy for modern day politicians. A little bit, not loads, but I have a little bit of sympathy for the fact that a lot of what we're talking about here, these big issues that require massive fundamental change, which also means massive investment, are, I would probably describe them as they're kind of like traps for a government in office. Because if we take, again, I mean, look, the NHS is massive, but if we take water, to go back to my pet peeve, if we take water as an example, the obvious thing that needs to happen with water, and it is obvious because loads of people are saying it, is it needs to be taken out of private hands and put back into government hands. The taxpayer should control. No nation should ever give up the control of its water supply to another country. I mean, it just shouldn't, okay? Regardless of history. So we need to take it back into public hands. That will cost billions of pounds to do because that's cancellation of all types of contracts. We have to take it over. But then they can't just take it over and say, we're now in control, everything's going to get better. They then have to do the investment that hasn't happened over the last 30 years, which is even
Yeah.
more billions of pounds at a time when a government is saying we don't have a lot of money. And again, whether we think they have a lot of money or not, it's like that's the position. So you fast forward and say, okay, the government has taken over water again. They've started to invest loads of money. They've had to put loads of taxes up. They've had to do all these different things, which are then hurting people in their pockets. And then a general election is called, and they lose. That is why they're scared, effectively, about
Well,
these things.
you mentioned the I word, which is investment, right? And with all of these things, water, energy, right, etc., they are all regulated markets. There is a regulator who can literally screw these companies down to the ground if they choose to do so, and sadly, a lot of their time they haven't. But let's just give a couple of neat little illustrations, and it's not just here, right? So, do you remember the fiasco where Heathrow ran out of power? So Heathrow went dark. A substation had a
Yeah.
fire, and despite the fact that there's three different power supplies into Heathrow, basically the airport goes down and chaos ensues. I think that was a few months ago. The substation that set on fire is essentially, I think, 60 years old, something like that, and hasn't had any money spent on it because the privatized energy networks want to sweat the assets as hard as they can until they set on fire. And we've seen similar in other parts of the network where, again, all of these water leaks are primarily because they're not spending money on basic maintenance. They're not investing in the basics. But the absurdity of all of this is people always say, well, how can we afford it? Well, how can we afford not to do it? Because it's not as if you can cope with an energy network where your substations just keep setting on fire and burning down. Well, we can't afford to replace them, so we'll just have to cope, right? No, we've got to get the thing sorted. We can't afford to have it where people don't have drinking water for 10 days because there's been another massive leak. We've got to fix it. So that's the point of we're going to spend the money one way or another. We're going to spend the money fixing the mess and clearing up after it, or we're actually going to invest to have something that's actually fit for purpose.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's what it is. It's about actually making short-term decisions that affect the long term, rather than short-term decisions that just affect the short term, which is what a lot of people, well, a lot of politicians are doing. Think, and look, water is one example. We can look at the railways. We can look at, again, railways. The problem with the railways is it gets taken in isolation, right? It's what we really need to be looking at is a transport infrastructure, right? Because what is the best way for me to get from A to B on a given day? Some days, so it might be the train, it might be to drive, it might be to get a coach, it might be a tram system if one exists in my city, it might be to fly. It really, this is that bit about the lack of joined up thinking. Everything impacts everything else. And when you talk about investment, and this is the most important thing for me, is like investment breeds jobs, right? It goes back to our skills crisis and our jobs crisis. If you invest the money, yes, there is an initial huge outlay of cash, but you know what? that very quickly starts to pay for itself because of the jobs you are creating, the additional, and again, the ancillary industries that that creates as well. If you need to completely renovate your entire water network in Britain, the number, I don't know what number of jobs, but it would be tens, if not hundreds of thousands of jobs to make that happen.
Yeah, exactly. It's not investing isn't burning money. Tipping money into the NHS is burning money. Clearing up the mess after yet another water fiasco is burning money. But investing in something that delivers a return on investment and drives economic growth, surely that's a good thing. Like down in southern England, you've got the Dartford crossing. So they obviously there were two tunnels, and then they built the bridge in 1994, I think it opened. It's still desperately short of capacity. So they've got this thing called the Lower Thames crossing, which is going to be another tunnel even further east than that. And they've been talking about it for 20 years. And all they're doing still is writing reports and assessing whether they're going to do this thing or not. But at the point of spending tens and indeed hundreds of millions thinking about something and writing enormous reports without actually doing anything of any substance. We're not building, we're prevaricating. And this is the absurd thing about it. With some of this now, there's an element of, look, just start building the sodding thing, right? We've got roads that need upgrades, and they've been talking about doing them for years. I drove over the A66 a couple of weeks ago, and that's been desperately in need of having just a dual carriageway to link either side of the country. And they've been talking about it for literally 30 years. And there's a nice shiny project office has been open. They're doing a little bit of digging outside, but the rest of it, nothing.
Yeah,
Just start
I'm
doing the sodding thing now. Because we know where it's going to go, right? And it's going to massively transform connectivity. Just get on with it.
yeah, I'm only laughing because with you mentioning the A66, it's like obviously I mean, you've lived here as well. I live in Sheffield, we're a place very close to, a bypass and a planned link road that has been in the planning for I think 60 years between Manchester and Sheffield to stop all of the problems between Manchester and Sheffield. For the first time, spades are in the ground and something is being built. But the thing that's being built that's taken them 60 years to do or start is such a, no offense,
Pop
half-assed
out.
job that it's only going to solve like 10% of the problem. It's not actually going to solve the issue in the end.
It's well, I know a little bit about this. So for people who are sat going, what on earth are they on about? So you've got Manchester and Sheffield, two cities which are what, 40 miles apart, 35? They're not actually that far, but you've got the Pennines. You've got the Pennines in the middle. So a fast road link between them has been talked about for absolutely ages. So for traffic that's going across at the moment, they're using the Woodhead Pass, which is a single carriageway road with an awful lot of trucks on it. And the eastern end had some upgrades done on it to a limited extent, but the western end literally trundles through these villages and sets the traffic lights where you just end up with this massive traffic jam. So people who live there have got the noise and the congestion and they can't get about. They've been talking about, as you say, building just a bypass for the villages forever, right? Decades. And they are now at the point where they're going to bypass one of the villages only, one, and not the other. So you're going to end up where, okay, it fixes it for those people, but it doesn't actually take any of the problems away. Any other country would have built a motorway between them 30, 40 years ago, right? The amount of roads that we no longer build in this country is absurd. But we don't, it's almost like we've forgotten that investing is a good thing. And I just don't understand it. Just build the bloody thing now.
Yeah, it's a great segue into that idea of what to do in terms of partially it's why are we not doing it, but also what to do. And look, there's lessons both in history and there's lessons in what other countries in the world are doing. I mentioned Silicon Valley the other day, and it's about political will. What's going on in China right now? China, it used to be called the sweatshop of the world and everything else. It's like it's not anymore. China has fundamentally changed in 20 years. They outsource all that sweatshop work now to other countries,
Absolutely.
surprisingly enough. That's what they do. But what is key about what they've done is they still maintain ownership. They own, even though they're exporting a lot of the jobs to other countries, the lower income jobs, because their income is increasing, their average income. Even though they do that, they're maintaining ownership of it, which is something we didn't do. We've just let it all go. We literally just sold it off to the highest bidder, or in some cases the lowest bidder.
Well,
Sorry.
I was going to say a lot of it's ideological, Nigel. Right? A lot of it's ideological. So
Yeah, of course.
the Tories really banged this drumbeat, and then New Labour followed in the same footprint. So we've effectively got people in the country who genuinely believe that the state cannot do anything, right? So for the people where they say the state cannot do anything, so okay, so they go into town on the bus, and the bus is owned by the French government, right? And they order something online, and it's going to get delivered by the French government, and then they're ordering electricity on their app, and their electricity provider is the French government. Other governments are available if you don't want the French, the Germans, the Italians, the Dutch. Everybody owns a piece of stuff in the UK. And these are not, it's not like French government ministers. These are state co's. They are owned by the government
Yeah.
and they are run commercially. And we absolutely could do the same thing, but we've decided that, well, we can't possibly do those things despite DPD and EDF and Arriva and all of these other things existing. We can't possibly have the state running it because it's going to be communism or something. It's just stupid.
Yeah. It's total insanity, but it's insanity when it makes sense. If that makes sense, and let me explain. It's that Britain is going through. We keep calling it managed decline, right? It's like we have declined from being a world superpower to being a regional power to just being any other country. And as that has happened, generations of people who have stepped into positions of power and what have you, they've grown up with this idea that Britain can't do something. That's Britain's past. That's our history. We used to do that, but we can't do it anymore. They're so focused, almost like tunnel vision on this is our road now. This is our only option, and it is to just accept the situation. But that's why on this podcast, what we're talking about is it doesn't have to be that way. China's growth, China's incredible growth to the point where they are going to replace the United States, if they have not already in some cases, as the world's primary superpower, was not ordained. It wasn't. It was about political will and desire and a vision to make it happen. And we can talk about the politics of individual countries and whether we agree with certain things that they do, but ultimately that's not the important bit. It's about any country can have the political will and desire to do it. They just have to see it through. They have to be willing to do it. They have to accept the fact they're going to get attacked. Sorry, go.
No, but the political will bit, this is where we fail, right? Because with so many of these projects that we've been talking about, there are naysayer politicians going, that's a terrible waste of money. Oh, we shouldn't be doing that. I used to live in Stockton-on-Tees, and Stockton has spent a load of money transforming the town centre. They started off with, let's completely repave and relay out the high street so that we can have this international Riverside Festival that's going in. Oh, that's a waste of money. And then you've got a 4,000 seater theatre, which they needed to spend their own money and get a load of lottery funding to completely refurbish it. It's the only thing of its size between Newcastle at one end and Leeds at the other, right? Oh, that'll be a terrible waste of money. It's full, right? Everybody tours there. The council own a hotel because most chain hotels aren't owned by the chain, they're owned by a franchisee. And in this case, it's the council. What a white elephant that's going to be. A ridiculous thing to spend taxpayers' money on. It's always full. But the naysayers don't think we should be doing anything. They don't have other ideas. They just say no. And this is your point, Nigel, that we've given up. But we don't have to have given up. We just need to make different choices.
No, exactly. And look, and I will defend this position to the end, that it's also not a cultural thing. It's not that British culture is we are ultra negative. I mean, we joke about being quite negative and everything else, but it's not that we are that negative and that we just are not believers, because historically we have been. Look at what this country has done and achieved. Literally, this country started and led the Industrial Revolution 200 years ago. Yes, the conditions were different. but it doesn't mean these things can't happen again. It is about will. It's about also giving people the opportunity to advance and to bring their ideas to fruition. This is the Silicon Valley thing, right? It's that willingness to give people enough rope to actually make things work before you kind of pull the rug from under them, and say, oh, no, 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 no more.
What people are missing is that some of these things where they say, "Well, that's a waste of time," or "It's too expensive," or whatever. They're missing the opportunity bit. So you've just talked about China, right? And China has spent an absolute fortune developing solar, right? It's so many solar panels in, the cost has dropped significantly, and obviously they've become far more efficient, and they're now literally leading edge technology, which they then export to other people. We should be there with wind and tidal. And, got some politicians, especially Reform UK, saying the wind farms off, they're ugly and they're expensive or whatever. And you say, well, what are you going to replace the energy with? And they're like, well, gas and nuclear. Well, okay, so gas we need to import because we don't have enough left. And nuclear, we long since gave up our ability to build nuclear reactors. So now we've got the French government and the Chinese government building our nuclear reactors, right? This is the absurdity of it. So what they're talking about doing is giving even more control away to other people. Whereas, right, wind, what we should be doing, we've got all these amazing universities. So for wind and tidal, we should have the universities developing the technology. We've got amazing manufacturing. We then build the technology and then not only use it ourselves, but then export the technology. This is literally what these other countries who have regenerated themselves have done. We've got something that we can sell to the world. Let's go and sell it, which incidentally, isn't that how Britain ended up owning a large chunk of the world in the first place?
Absolutely. And look, and this is actually a part of, for the reform naysayers out there, this is you can absolutely package this as a patriotic thing. It's like we can be the world
Yes.
leader in something. The fact that it's the world leader in, tidal technology, just because you don't like tidal technology doesn't mean that it's not a good thing for Britain to be the world leader in it. It's still a great thing. And again, it's almost shambolic that a large island nation is not the world leader in something like that. It's just it's insane. But again, the people are so, and particularly this goes back to the divisive thing in politics, people are so kind of focused on their own hatred, division, what will get them elected, that they can't see the wood for the trees. If you want to truly make Britain, and I'm going to say it, if you want to make Britain great again, then you have to do it by investing in all kinds of technologies and ideas, some of which you might think, you know what, I'm not really that into that.
Hang
But you
on.
know what?
Hold
That's
on.
what you do.
No, no, let's run with it. Let's run with it. Let's run with it. So, make America great again. The Trump program, right? Whether you agree with him or disagree with him, but the Trump program is to bring manufacturing jobs back into America. So instead of buying it from somebody else, we used to make this and we can do the thing again. So you're absolutely right. Make Britain great again, where instead of, like, as an example, all these wind farms that are going in, look, I'm a big advocate for clean technology for a whole number of reasons, but all of these wind farms, we're buying the parts from elsewhere because we don't bother making things anymore because,
Because we
well,
don't
not
care.
only is everything expensive, but the price of electricity is so frigging high in the UK that manufacturing anything in the UK versus anywhere else is far more expensive. So make Britain great again should be about becoming another manufacturing powerhouse. We've got the ideas, we've got the brilliant universities, we've got the manufacturing expertise, and we know how to export. It's just that we've given up, right? We develop, I mean, ARM, right? The chip that's in everybody's phone and all of the rest of it, created here, invented here, they start building it here, and then we end up selling the thing off. Or graphene, let's just sell the thing off. Or any other thing we've got, just sell it off, make the money now. That's all that matters is the money now, and then don't worry about the future. It's just bonkers. We can't afford to bring a lot of this stuff back, but for the new stuff that's coming through, grasp it, exploit it, sell it. That's what we're good at.
Yeah, be competitive. It's like that's what it's about. There's nothing wrong with competing. The rivalries, people talk about the dangers of conflict in the world and everything else, but the best types of conflict with your neighbors and with other countries are ones that don't involve shooting each other, right? They are conflicts over
Trade.
sport and trade and industry. Those are the kind of conflicts and rivalries we want to have. And there's nothing wrong with that. We can have trading partners that we work closely with. We can also have rivals because we are competing on an international stage to get things done. That's how you make it happen. Every other country does it, you know. But like you say, I think the most pertinent point of all of this is this idea that Britain has given up and the
Yes.
mindset has to shift.
Yes. Yes. And this is the point, right? How do we, from all of the services stuff, to try and start trying to wrap this up again? If you want enough teachers in your schools, because that's probably important, and you actually need to be able to go and see a GP, and you want to be able to drive around the country without sitting in traffic, and you want water when it's raining, right, going out your tap rather than just flooding everything, you've got to go and invest in these things. And you can only invest if you've got an economy that's growing. Well, how do we grow an economy? We set out as China have done, frankly, as Saudi Arabia is now doing, ridiculously huge investments that he's making over a long period of time. As the Qataris and Abu Dhabi and Dubai look at who owns things, assets that generate money in the UK, a lot of it is other people's investment funds. So we need to have the big picture thing and say, right, okay, in 20, 30 years' time, who are we going to be? And we are going to be, a manufacturing powerhouse. We are going to have the best infrastructure that you can have to compete with the French and the Germans and all the rest of it. So, therefore, we need to train teachers, we need to train nurses, we need to make construction sexy again so that people want to work in it. We need this, we need this, we need this. And then all of those pieces are put into place strategically. And you touched earlier on, the absolutely like your killer point. All of these things at the moment are done in isolation. I know we've got an issue with this. Well, okay, let's set another target. And it just makes it more and more and more broken. The big picture thing is where are we going and what are the things that we need? And if we start there, then everything else flows onto a plan that pushes us forward rather than at the moment dragging us back.
Yeah, totally, 100%. It's about vision. It is about vision, and British politicians have been lacking in vision for a very, very long time. But the vision to say, this is the country of the future, this is what the country will be for your children and grandchildren. But to make that happen, we need to start now. These are the things we need to do. And I think voters are willing to give people a chance if they are talking about hope and a long-term vision. I genuinely think that they are. I mean, hope's become a bit of a dirty word in politics these days, but it shouldn't be. I do firmly believe that hope always trumps fear. It just needs to be
Well,
delivered by people in power or seeking power.
I think it used to do, and you've got organizations like Hope Not Hate, which I'm sure will just get dismissed as your liberal wokeism or whatever. But hope and, wanting to do better for the future, isn't that what we all do, right? You hope for a better life for your kids than you had, than the previous generations had. We all hope, but instead it's been turned into fear. And increasingly these days, it's being turned into hate. So I think to try and wrap this up, because otherwise we'll come in and talk about all these different bits in a lot more detail. But the big picture solution for how you sort out services is by having a clue about the kind of country you need the services for. And unless you can actually step all the way back from the 47 targets that the NHS has got, and Ofsted are coming and they need three, this, and this, and well, we can't build that road because we've got to do a report into newts or some other nonsense. Step all the way back from the detail and think about the big picture stuff. How do we get around? How do we educate ourselves? How do we stay healthy? How do we make stuff and sell it? And then once you've got that, the rest of it falls into place. The problem, as you say, is that none of the politicians seem to want to bother with anything longer than the next electoral cycle. And so we stay broke.
Perfect. Let's end it there. Thanks, Ian, and talk soon, everyone.